David, thank you very much for that very nice introduction, and thank you all for giving that very nice welcome and for coming. That's very nice of you. Well, we've been traveling around the country, we've been traveling around the state, and I'm sure glad the revolution is alive and well in Houston as well. Every once in a while, you've noticed that the media will come up and say, "When are you going to quit?" It's really getting going. But they said everybody else is dropping out. And I said, yeah, they ran out of money, they ran out of supporters, and nobody comes to their rallies. So the enthusiasm is obviously very great and growing. The crowds have been magnificent and the funds come in. But the message is, of course, the key issue. And we can be very pleased that it's well received. And of course, we know that it's well received by young people, but there are a lot of other people now at all age groups and all diversity, all kinds of diversity, who are enthusiastic about the liberty message. People have changed a lot in the last 4 years. We had a campaign 4 years ago. It was, as far as I was concerned, very successful. But something happened 4 years ago. Some of the things that we were talking about and warning about came about. There was a financial crisis. People know that there has an explanation for this, and they know that it has a lot to do with monetary policy and the mischief of the Federal Reserve System. It's now worth 2 cents. I would say that along with the recession, the unemployment, and the rising prices, that they have come in with an F grade, they have failed, so it is time to look to something very not complex of what to do. Why don't we just look to the Constitution and find out that gold and silver is supposed to be legal tender? That's what we need to do. What happened in these last 4 years is the discovery that American people are worn out. They're worn out with the wars. And they've come around to our assessment that we're going to war too often, too carelessly. We should do it only with a declaration of war under constitutional grounds or civil rights. Depressions and recessions are ended by going to war. That is nonsense. Always the cost of war is a depressant on the livelihoods of all Americans and all citizens. But the one thing is the American people now agree with us. 70% of the American people say, time to come home. Get home. Instead of the Republican Party, the other candidates offering a solution that is even close to ours, they were competing to try to who is the most critical of Obama and who could advocate going into another war the most. We don't need another war. We don't need to go into Syria or into Iraq. last 10 years. Just think how much richer this country would be if we had not spent that money on wars that are not being won, that we don't even know while we're there, we don't know what the purpose is, it doesn't provide for strong national defense, and of course they're not constitutional wars. But what if we had not fought any unconstitutional wars since World War II? Think how wealthy this country would have been. Right now today, we are not wealthy. We're the biggest debtor in the nation. We have a middle class that used to be the largest and the wealthiest in the history of the world, is now shrinking and getting poorer, and it has a lot to do with the foreign policy. So we need a constitutional foreign policy designed for strong national defense, bringing our troops home and getting out of these wars as soon as possible. Has been that if you don't support the wars, somehow or other you don't support the troops. The question is, if anybody asks about that, just ask them, then why do the troops support Ron Paul more than everyone else? I was drafted into the service in 1962 during the Cuban crisis. I remained in the Air Force. I was in it five years. But during that time, I had not thought out all the answers and questions about what foreign policy would be, but I did my very best. I went, I served, but it was only afterwards that it really dawned on me that policy is what really counts. To put our young men and women under the circumstances that we have done is so precarious. And just think of the sadness of what is happening today. The thousands being killed, the tens of thousands being wounded and injured, the hundreds of thousands now begging and pleading for help by our Veterans Administration, the post-traumatic stress syndrome, the brain injuries that are going on, the suicide that occurred, the financing of this is ongoing. This is why, when it comes to the issue of war, it's probably one of the most important things that a Congress and a president should weigh and be extremely careful not to get involved. In 1998, our policies changed. Our policy at that time changed to that of getting rid of Saddam Hussein. Even though he had been an ally of ours for many years, and we tolerated all his shenanigans, but in 1998 said we have to get rid of Saddam Hussein. But they didn't have enough we weren't able to get enough support for this and get the people behind it. But guess what happened? After 9/11, the support came. Remember all the stories we were told, the nuclear weapons he had, the weapons of mass destruction he had quietly in there. It wasn't true. So, of course, then the big argument was that we had to go to war. I was on the international relations, and I thought, now I have a different responsibility. So I could tell, obviously, the war propaganda was marching us off to war. So what I offered to the committee was, look, I don't want to go to war. I'm not going to vote for this authorization where you would say the president can do whatever he take their oath of office seriously. So the answer should be, don't send anybody up there until you're convinced they know how to read, and they know how to understand, and that they tell you the truth and will obey the Constitution. This certainly will take care of the monetary issue. The Declaration of War, Article 1, Section 8 is very clear. It spells out exactly what things we're allowed to do. We do need a whole lot of re-education on the Interstate Commerce Clause and the General Welfare Clause. But this is necessary for us to understand what the role of government ought to be. That's why we have a revolution. The revolution was they did not like the role of the king. And quite frankly, I believe we're putting up with more authoritarianism from our own government than they have to put up with the king of England. We're sworn into the military, or sworn into office, we take an oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today, let me tell you, we do not have to lie awake worried about anybody invading this country. We have the strongest and most efficient military in the history of the world. We have more weapons than everybody else put together. We spend more money than everybody else put together. Nobody would dare touch us and attack us. But our threats are here at home. They're financial and they're an attack on our civil liberties. Right after 9/11, within weeks, the first piece of legislation that was passed in reaction wasn't a clear understanding of what brought about 9/11 and what the problem really was in foreign policy. But for some reason, the law they passed had nothing to do with punishing those individuals that committed the crime. It was punishment on the American people, and they passed a law that needs repealed, and that is the Patriot Act. You know, one member of Congress told me he had to vote for it because it was called the Patriot Act. I said, well, did you read the bill? He says, no, I didn't read it. I said, you know, there's some bad stuff in there. He said, yes, I know that. But how can I go home and explain it to my constituents why I voted against something called the Patriot Act after 9/11? I said, well, that's your job. Go home and explain it to them. I'm sure you know that the names of the bill, you can depend that the name of the bill is actually opposite of what the bill does. So it wasn't a Patriot Act, it was unpatriotic, that act. If it had been called repeal the Fourth Amendment, maybe it wouldn't have gotten so many votes. That has opened up a Pandora's box as far as what our government can do. The Fourth Amendment was very important to the founders, and it was very important for our revolution. It was to protect us against illegal searches and seizures from our government. Today, though, with the Patriot Act and various other pieces of legislation, our government can do just about and make just about anything we have. There is essentially no privacy. I think what has happened is we had this flipped around. The government, the role that the government was given was to be very minor. That was to guarantee your privacy. But we were supposed to have guaranteed openness of government. But now we don't have openness of government, but what we do need is openness of government. We can start with auditing the Federal Reserve, and we should. We have been slipping and sliding away from the protection of civil liberties for a good while. But in these recent months, it's gotten much worse. With the National Defense Authorization Act, we know election turns out favorable to us, I'll put that on the top of the list for repealing that. The other thing a constitutional president can do is look at all the laws that were passed by executive orders that are unconstitutional. Under those circumstances, I'm convinced you can use an executive order to repeal bad executive orders. 2 weeks ago, the president used the executive order to take the Defense Production Act and change the wording, and he goes to Congress and change the wording that under emergency conditions of war, unfortunately and tragically, the power has been given to the president to declare nationalization of everything under his, when he declares an emergency. But he changed the words that not only under times of war, but he says in times of peace, the president has this authority as well. That obviously has to be on the list of those bills and that legislation that we should be repealing.
Yeah.
It's like the military and the rest of American citizen denied a trial, put in prison, denied an attorney, and put in a seat in prison. This is not what America is all about. This is not America, and we have to not put our heads in the sand and just let it go by. We need to wake up, do something about it, and make sure our members of Congress know. A few weeks ago, we had some success by a lot of people like you writing and telling your members of Congress not to support that Stop Online Piracy Act, that attack on I use that as an example, saying when people wake up and send the message, we can stop some of this bad legislation. But tragically, they quickly came up with another bill and said, well, this is a little bit safer, a little bit better, a little bit compromised, not nearly as dangerous. That was the SISTA bill. And very sadly, it was passed yesterday with a pretty strong. The president claims he's going to veto this bill because it's not strong enough. He likes the Senate bill because it's not stronger, and it would force Google and these other companies, force them to turn over all your information to the government. So this bill has not passed the Senate. There will be some more negotiation. Keep your eyes and ears open on this. Let's hope that it doesn't get passed before the end of the year, because maybe we will have a new Congress and a new president by next year. for any reason, and they decided 5 to
for belonging to a group, and a privilege is when you belong to a group. We cannot accept the principle that some are above the law and some must be treated differently. Everybody has to be treated exactly like under the rule of law. There's another area that has, longer than the current wars of the past 10 years, that have served to undermine our liberties. And it's been going on for a good many years, but especially since the early 1970s. It has caused our national debt to go up over $3 trillion, and it has accomplished nothing. And that is the ill-advised federal war on drugs. Drugs are very dangerous. As a physician and parent, grandparent, I know all the dangers about drugs. But also, I know a little bit about liberty, and I understand a little bit about privacy and what freedom is all about. The war on drugs is a lot more dangerous than the drugs themselves. It's the principle of who is supposed to protect you from yourself and making a bad judgment. The government, or should it be you making a decision about what you should do? So, it's a freedom issue. If you have the right to make your own decisions on the books you read, the church you go to, you ought to have the right to decide what you put into your own body. But once this liberty is given up, what it leads to is overexplosion of the government, because the government assumes that you need the government to protect you from yourself, which means they tell you about food and drugs and alternative medical care and nutritional products, whether or not you can even drink raw milk is up to hand. Well, one thing, when the republic is restored, we'll all have the legal right once again to drink raw milk. said we were wealthy and we could afford all this mischief. Wars that should have been fought and redistribution of wealth and entitlement system to give everybody a free house, free education, free medical care, and all we did was get higher prices. The housing example is the perfect example of how entitlements backfire and don't work. We're supposed to be made to help poor people get houses. Well, they did for a while, and they used it as a cash cow to borrow against increasing equity. Then the country goes bankrupt, they lose their jobs, and they lose their house, guess who's going to get bailed out? The people who are making all the money in the financial markets with the housing money, making days in the So very simply, we have to reject the notion that the entitlement system actually works. Since we're broke, we can't continue with this. It doesn't work, it's not right, it's not part of the Constitution. We're now broke, but we need to go back to work. I think what happened to us many years ago is because one of the consequences, and a big consequence of freedom, is prosperity. It's wonderful. But what happened is we concentrated on the material prosperity and we started looking to the government for special favors and redistribution and privileges. And during all that time, we started consuming the wealth that we had, consuming the value of our dollar, and now the treasury is bare and we're not producing. And we should concentrate on something we have forgotten about. How do you produce wealth? Concentrate on the free market, private property, contracts, gold standards, balanced budget, and a sensible foreign policy. Once I think we follow economic system, the liberal economic theories of Keynes and Bernanke and Krugman, we've gotten ourselves into this mess. We spend too much money. We fail to give incentives for people to work. We have tax codes that are be flawed. We try to use regulations to cover up the mistakes made because of artificially low interest rates. We did all these things. We had excessive spending, debt, borrowing, regulations, and then earning too much money. So the predictable event would be a deep recession or depression. So it wasn't a bit surprising that the Boston free market economists was what happened 5 years ago. But those who brought this on us are still in charge. They're still in Washington. They still control the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the Congress. So what is their solution? Let's spend more. They tell you the answer to all this. Well, we should spend more money, regulate more, and print more money. And then they wonder, why doesn't it work? Well, it's a deeply flawed system, and that is the reason that the alternative, the answers we have, I am absolutely convinced are an answer to the stagnating economy, which I think is going to get a lot worse unless we wake up and say, this is a freedom principle, this is a freedom idea, this is an understanding of property rights. The founders were worried after they wrote the Constitution that we would, as a people, would be careless and we would allow the republic to slip away. They were very precise in the difference between a republic and a democracy. Democratic elections and elected leaders, that was one thing. But pure democracy means that the dictatorship of the majority rules and it destroys the minority. That the minority is demonized by people who can vote away their rights. Just as the minority opinion has voted away your civil liberties, whether it's the drug war or these other wars. So they warned us that if you're not careful, what will happen is you will not remain a republic, you will become a pure democracy. And a democracy, they claim, would waste our resources, it would consume our wealth, and then eventually self-destruct. Well, we have wasted a lot, we have consumed a lot, our currency is just, it's not yet worthless, but it has no backing, and potentially will become worthless, and we're on the verge of self-destructing. But the very good news is that there are not just tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. I claim that there are millions of people now in this country who are responding to the message of liberty, and they know exactly. System of liberty If you want the welfare state assistance, then you can do it. If you think we should still be the police of the world and go to State Nation building and you try to listen to all around the world, you can't do it. But if you look to a definition of what the world government ought to be in a free society, they say that it's the protection of liberty, protection of property, making sure nobody counterfeits the money, and have a national defense where we're not wasting our resources overseas. If we change that, we can balance the budget, but you won't be able to balance the budget unless you change the role of government. Thomas Paine, during the Revolution, said the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. So yes, it's going to be hard. It's not going to come easily. It's going to be require much determination. It is magnificent what a small group of people can do, and they understand that in the revolution. It is that irate, tireless minority keen on starting fresh waters of liberty in the minds of them that we will pursue and carry on. The best test of freedom ever in the history of man has been in this country. But the experiment is no longer in place, but we can restore. And this is what America the Beautiful is all about, restoring the principles of liberty and not going back, but to pick up and even make it even more miraculous. And it is the thing that is available to us, probably more so in spite of the problems. I think our country is in worse shape than it was even during the Depression and during the World Wars, because the foundations have been eroded. The foundations of our liberty, the foundations of our money, the debt burden is so great. But we can, because I think more people now have awakened and they understand it even better. I think philosophically we're way ahead. Now we have to translate that philosophic commitment into political action, and that, of course, is what we're involved in right now. Society is my goal. I'm willing to live in a free society, even if I were poor. But I'll tell you what, in a free society, you don't have to make a choice. The freer the society, the more wealthy the society will be, so we have no worries about it. To live in a free society, to own our own lives, and seek our own way, is to seek virtue, to seek excellence. The government can't do that for us. So we've assumed that many have accepted the fact that the government is going to do that, and we've accepted this man-made state. But if you want a free society where people feel good about their production, have creative energy, and be rewarded for what you do, this is what we have to do. We have to restore this confidence. And of course, as I travel and meet so many young people, and meet so many others who are young in spirit, they may be past 30, they have a young spirit also, and they understand. The words will be simply that the goal is to see peace and prosperity will be done by strictly limiting the government, maximizing the incentives by individuals, protecting their liberties, and this is what we must do. For us, peace and prosperity should be the goal. Liberty for each and every one of us. Everybody should be treated the same, because freedom brings us together. It doesn't tell